Hey everyone, this is MNL2, and today in this video, I want to take a look at all the roller coasters that reside at Cedar Point and find out which roller coasters are going to deliver the most intense experiences. For the purposes of this video, I will not be including every single roller coaster at the park in this list because some of the smaller coasters don't exactly have any intense moments. Also, when I refer to intensity or an intense moment, I mostly interpret it as having a feeling of sheer speed, considerable positive G-forces, or moments that make you feel like you're going to get ripped apart from the ride. Another thing, keep in mind that this list does not reflect how much I like each ride or how I rank them overall in the park. This list is simply based on which coasters I find to be the most intense. One more thing, if you find yourself enjoying any of my videos or find them interesting, informative, or entertaining in any way, then please feel free to like the video below to help out the channel and to help me to keep providing good content for your enjoyment. Thank you. So before I start ranking the coasters by intensity, I would quickly like to reiterate that when I rank coasters by intensity, I'm not ranking them by how much I actually like them. So real quick, I'm just going to tell you guys what my top 10 at Cedar Point is based on how much I simply like each coaster, all factors included. At number 10, I have Gemini, 9 is Rugru, 8 is Blue Streak, 7 is Millennium Force, 6 is Magnum XL 200, 5 is Valraven, 4 is Gatekeeper, 3 is Top Throw Jackster, 2 is Maverick, and number 1 is the almighty Steel Vengeance. Now, on to the actual video. Alright, so Blue Streak was one of those coasters that I rode during my trip that I immediately thought to myself, wow, that was way more aggressive than it really should have been upon getting off my first ride on it. Although it is a very small and simple out and back PTC wooden coaster, each airtime hill will deliver super aggressive bursts of airtime, ejecting you out of your seat really freaking hard. If hashtag no restraint game comes to fruition, then this is one of the coasters you definitely won't survive. Also, one thing to note is I rode this thing very front and very back, and somehow the back row only provides very moderate floater, whereas the front row will deliver the demonic ejector. Now, aside from the crazy aggressive ejector hill, the coaster doesn't do anything else to be considered intense, so that's why it's at the bottom of this list. But then again, it's still a very intense wooden coaster considering its size and also compared to some other small woodies out there. Formerly known as Mantis, a B&M stand-up coaster. This B&M stand-up turned floorless coaster named after a legendary creature in French folklore that draws comparisons to the mythical werewolf? Cedar Point. Look, it's cool that you want to try to theme your rides to some foreign cultures and all, but like, how on earth is anyone supposed to know that? Seriously, if you want theming and immersive experiences, just don't even come to Cedar Point. This ride has literally no theming. Anyways, looking at the actual ride experience, I would say that it's a mid-tier floorless, with coasters like Firebird and Patriot being low tier, and Medusa, Bizarro, and Scream, yes, Scream, being high tier. Rugru has a nice drop as it isn't curved since it takes place after a 180-degree turnaround. However, this drop isn't very steep and won't give you any snap going over. The vertical loop is pretty forceful, as most B&M vertical loops are anyways. The rest of the ride though is honestly pretty graceful, aside from the incline loop, which is also pretty intense. The corkscrew doesn't give a whole lot of snap going through it, and those ending curves don't really deliver any positives. So overall, this is still a coaster that can make you gray out in the first 10 seconds of the ride, but other than that, it isn't a super intense ride. The original hypercoaster built by Aerodynamics is a roller coaster that still delivers insane experiences to this day. Though Magnum XL 200 isn't the most forceful coaster out there, its combination of weird, janky aero banking and relentless elements with little to no dry sections, looking at you, Ride of Steel, make this coaster fairly intense. The first few hills are pretty graceful as it basically crawls over, but once it gets to the super jank turnaround, this ride starts getting more aggressive. The turnaround itself provides a weird combination of laterals and positives, and then afterwards comes the absolute best series of airtime hills on a roller coaster that isn't Steel Vengeance, or Twisted Timbers, or Diamondback, or Steel Force. But anyways, those triangular airtime hills will send you absolutely flying out of your seat no matter where you are positioned in the train. I managed both front and back row rides on this thing, and both were killer. I prefer back row for the drop, but when it comes to this ending series of aggressive airtime hills, I will easily take the front. Before I say anything about Gatekeeper's experience, may we please have a moment of silence for Gatekeeper's chain, which tragically snapped a few weeks ago. Okay, anyways, Gatekeeper is probably one of the most iconic B&M wing coasters out there, and is also a pretty intense ride in general. The wing over drop sets you up for an insane moment as you dive down into one of the most intense inversions out there. This drop leading into the Immelman is an extremely intense maneuver and will easily cause a gray out. The following airtime hill honestly feels exactly like one of those giant camelbacks on a B&M Hyper. Not too aggressive, but it is enough to keep you floating for a decent amount of time. The keyholes in my opinion didn't actually provide as much of a head chopper as I was hoping for, but the effect is still cool cool and worth mentioning. The rest of the ride is sporadically filled with intense moments, including the dive loop and the final helix, which both pull some quality positive Gs. It's definitely not the most intense B&M in the park, however, with the incredible first drop and inversion, it is definitely enough to make this coaster more intense than Rugru and Magnum. Raptor is the park's B&M invert, and out of all 9 B&M inverts that I've ridden, this one actually falls close to the bottom. The only inverts I put below Raptor are Great Bear at Hershey Park, and the coaster that I promise I'm not bullying, it's just underwhelming in comparison to the rest of the inverts I've ridden, but that would be Silver Bullet. I still like that ride though. It's better than Ghost Rider. Anyways, Raptor seems like it really can't decide whether or not it wants to be a small, tight, compact, and aggressive coaster such as Batman the Ride Clones or Flight Deck, or if it wants to be a big, giant, girthy beast like Banshee or Alpengeist. So, though it does have some pretty intense moments, it's not the most intense invert out there. Though, when compared to non-inverts, aka the rest of Cedar Point, it is still an intense roller coaster that will deliver some pretty solid positives on the first loop, the Cobra Roll, and the final helix, and all those random turns and stuff. Millennium Force, Millennium Forceless, I'll take either name. This coaster actually exceeded my expectations for about 8 seconds. The rest of the ride following the first overbank was, for the most part, underwhelming. So anyways, taking a look at this legendary Intamin Giga, the first drop, which by the way was the first drop over 300 feet on a complete circuit roller coaster, is actually one of the best drops out there. It gives you some awesome air as you dive down into a minefield of bugs and experience an overbank turn that is definitely enough to make you gray out. The Camelback airtime hills can honestly be hit or miss. Honestly, the smaller these hills get, the more aggressive they become. My favorite airtime moment on this ride has to be the second to last airtime hill, which is the one that appears before the second tunnel. As for the rest of the elements, the other overbank turns are somewhat forceful, but not enough to make you gray out. Overall, this ride does deliver the absolute best feeling of sheer speed as you are flying through this layout. This coaster's pacing is incredible, and combining all those factors together, this is why this ride is top 5 when it comes to intensity. But for me personally, it doesn't actually crack my top 5 when looking at all the factors. Still fun though.
Hey Valraven, are you a toilet? Cause it seems like all people do is take big fat dumps all over you. Seriously, why does this ride get so much hate?
Why don't people love Valraven? It was literally the 3rd dive coaster in America and it isn't even that old. Ugh. Oh, I know. It's because when Cedar Point builds a roller coaster, God forbid it's anything like any other roller coaster that exists anywhere else on the planet. Huh. Maybe that's why so many people want Wicked Twister to be removed. Anyways, looking at Valraven, this coaster actually blew me away. This was my first B&M dive coaster, and it was actually incredibly intense. Not only is the drop super intimidating, but the first Immelman is way more intense than it looks. Like, you think that I-305's first turn is intense? Oh, that's funny. Valraven also has an amazing second drop, especially in the back row, and then the following dive loop is also super freaking forceful. The 270-degree roll thingy that people talk about, it was pretty graceful, and it doesn't really add or take away from the ride's intensity, but it is a nice little element. The final airtime hill is actually a solid moment of flowjector, and is definitely worth mentioning. Oh, and one more thing. The B&M vest restraints are actually great. You know how people like to complain about headbanging all the time? Well, when B&M goes and creates a new type of restraint which ultimately eliminates the possibility of headbanging, you know what the Thusies say? Oh, it sucks because it forces us to get stapled. Oh, right, yeah. Like RMC hybrid restraints or El Toro's restraints don't work the same way and force you to get stapled unless you are actively holding up your restraint the whole time. Nah. Also, doesn't this just prove how intense Valraven actually is? Because if it's so forceful that it will still close your restraint tighter even when you are actively pushing against it, then I would say that is intense. Alright, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with this one, especially because I already talked about Accelerator in depth in my video ranking Knott's coasters by intensity, but I'm just going to sum it up. Basically, the launch on its own is the most powerful and aggressive start to any roller coaster at Cedar Point. The combined feeling of being plastered to your back and the wind deforming your entire face creates a nearly unbeatable experience. Emphasis on nearly. But then of course, the top head is also outstanding as you get some great lateral snap going up, and then you get violently thrown down its 270-degree vertical spiral, which hits super hard in the back row. This thing is considerably stronger than Accelerator, and is overall just a crazy intense 30-second experience. So you wanted airtime, did ya? Ladies and gentlemen, this roller coaster right here is not only the best roller coaster that I have ever ridden, but it's also one of the most aggressive roller coasters out there, period. Yes, I know I'm generic for saying this because it's Steel freaking Vengeance and all, but let's actually talk about this thing. I'm not going to go in depth with the layout just because it's so long and packs so much into one ride, and that, as a matter of fact, is one of the biggest reasons as to why this is my current number one, not only at Cedar Point, but in general. Now, just because it is my number one in general doesn't mean that I find it to be the most intense, hence why I have it at number 2 on this list. Nonetheless, this roller coaster still provides an insanely intense experience. Sure, you aren't going to be getting much of the positive G-force factor on this ride, but the amount of time this ride spends trying to violently launch you into geostationary orbit is mind-blowing. A big problem with certain rides like Railblazer or Batman clones is that they are over so fast. They put heavy emphasis on quality and not much on quantity. Though Steel Vengeance doesn't exactly have the quality of Railblazer, it has like 100 times better the quantity. And I'm not saying the quality is bad, oh no. This thing is aggressive. Each airtime hill will be ejecting you really freaking hard. The only real moments of floater on this thing are the 2 giant top hats at the beginning of the ride, and when this thing is hauling, even those are somewhat aggressive. On top of everything, when this ride dives down into the infrastructure, it amplifies the high speed sensation, similarly to how I described Ghost Rider's infrastructure section to be. But like 9,000 times better. Not that Ghost Rider is even comparable to Steel Vengeance. I mean, that's like comparing Minor Mike to Skyrush, like, come on. Anyways, with all that said, Steel Vengeance is a super intense and relentless experience, and when considering all factors, it simply cannot be beaten. However, when focusing on just the intensity aspect, there is one roller coaster at Cedar Point that I'm gonna have to hand number 1 to. Okay, so Maverick is number 1. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'm just kidding. Yeah, of course I'm going to talk about this ride. Maverick is a super unique roller coaster, an Intamin Blitz, and definitely the strongest coaster in all of Cedar Point when it comes to intensity. Do not, and I mean do freaking not be fooled by this ride's tiny size. I'm going to be the one to say it. Maverick's drop? Yes, yeah, that little tiny thing right there is stronger than Steel Vengeance's drop. And then everything after, well, let's just say you are in for a treat. First comes a bank turn that is sure to make you gray out. And then follows some insane transitions. Out of every roller coaster I have ridden, Maverick has the absolute most aggressive transitions ever. The first 2 transitions between the low to the ground bank turns are just pure upright insanity. The airtime hills are incredibly strong and sustained ejector. The 2 inversions are actually super graceful and don't provide that much snap. These 2 inversions are surprisingly the weakest part of the ride in my opinion. But then you continue this insane experience as you violently whip into the mid-course where you are met with a sudden burst forward, launching you into probably the most aggressive transition yet, sending you into an insanely hard left and then into a series of trims, which thank goodness are there, because if they weren't, I'm pretty sure this ride would just be too much to handle. The transition where the Heartland roll used to be is kind of mediocre, but your disappointment will immediately vanish as you snap into the 2 Stangle dives. Probably the absolute best finale to a roller coaster yet. Like, this is debatably a better finale than Steel Vengeance's final series of little ejector pops. These 2 dives are some of the most aggressive elements on a roller coaster ever. When you take a look back at this whole layout, this ride just does not stop, and it is relentless as heck with 2 C's. If you don't like intense or overwhelming experiences, then stay the frick away from Maverick. But if you are like me, and you crave the wildest, most aggressive roller coasters ever, then Maverick is the ride for you. Anyways, those are my thoughts regarding the coasters of Cedar Point and how they compare to one another when it comes to intensity. Keep in mind that this list is solely based on my own personal opinions, and I fully understand that some of you might completely disagree with anything or literally everything on this list. So if that's the case, feel free to comment down below what you find to be the most intense roller coaster at Cedar Point or the most intense roller coaster that you've ridden is. But anyways, if you did end up enjoying the video, then please remember to leave a like and subscribe with notifications turned on so you'll be alerted whenever I upload a new video. But until then, I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.